Hi, welcome to Quid Pros Quo. I'm Zach,
And I'm Rin.
and today we are continuing our series about story structure by talking about the Pixar Story Spine. This is one of my favorite structural tools to use to help pull everything together for a story. So, Rin, what is the Story Spine?
So the story spine is like a fill in the blank, not Mad Lib, but Mad Lib is almost the word that comes to mind, but a fill in the blank sentence that goes once upon a time, blank, every day, blank. But one day, blank, because of that, blank, because of that, blank, because of that, blank, until finally, blank, and ever since then, blank. So you fill in the blanks with what happens in your story, and we can give examples of this later on in the episode.
Yeah, it's a super versatile framework for, first of all, understanding the structure of stories that exist out there inside of the world. So if you are trying to find exercises to kind of clue into the different structures that are out there, the story spine is a really good place to start to hang everything onto it. But it's also a good way of thinking through your structure, particularly because the action of the plot is tied together through consequences. You'll notice that a big part of the story spine, half of it, is just saying because. And so when you're answering the question of because, you're thinking, what are the implications of what happened right before? So this is kind of going along with one of the things that Lisa Crone talked about inside of Story Genius, where you want the logic of the plot to follow from what people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It also reminds me of our world building series where we talked about like iterative world building, where we say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, because of this, then this
Yeah.
happens. So that's also a really great way to tie it into your world building. Um, so an example of the story spine and like being tied together by consequences is the Princess Bride. So everything that happens in the story is a consequence of something that happened early in the story or the decisions the characters make. So, for example, Princess Buttercup decides to go for a ride. She happens upon some pirates who kidnap her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she tries to run away, gets attacked by the screeching eels, so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the nice things about the story spine is that you can go through, it's something that you can add to it. You can add as many becauses to the story spine as you want. It doesn't have to be a complete sentence. You can chop it up into however many sentences that you want. And when you do that, you can lengthen out what is going on inside of your story. Keeping it short gives you a bit better idea of what the structure is going to look like, but lengthening it out can help to tighten up the logic of what's going on inside of your story. The other thing that you can do for the story spine is that you can have multiple plot threads that are going through your story, and you advance each of the plot threads through the elements of the story spine. So every plot thread is going to have a once upon a time. You're going to set the scene. You're going to show what the status quo is, and then you're going to come in and you're going to disrupt the status quo. This was basically what I did to keep track of all of the different subplots inside of the Black Crescent, was that I used the story spine slash the 4-act structure to go through each of the different subplots inside of the book and advance them through, showing how each of them develops over time to help maintain good pacing and variety throughout the story.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of comparison to other plot structures, the story spine maps pretty well onto the 3-act structure, where the first 3 blanks of once upon a time, blank, every day, blank, but one day, blank, make up act 1. The second 3, which is just the because of that, make up act 2, and then the last blank is the end ever since, or until finally blank, and ever since then blank, they make up act 3. So you can notice that the story spine spends a lot of time in Act 1, which is not a bad thing. It will come into a different story.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of like Toy Story, you notice that there's like a lot of times that the toys spend just like in Andy's bedroom, just chilling and vibing. It's probably a good like 20 or 30 minutes of the movie. I don't know. I haven't seen Toy Story in forever. But there's nothing wrong with having a slow start. Just know that it's not going to be like starting in media res.
Yeah, if you're looking for a structure that's going to lend itself better to in media res, you're going to need to look somewhere else than the story spine, because this is much more of it's a much more relaxed beginning.
Mm-hmm. It almost has a fairy tale vibe just because it starts with Once Upon a Time.
Yeah.
And our next story structure for next week, Harmon's Story Cycle, also has a fairy tale-esque structure. So if you're looking for... I'm trying to think of which of the plot structures we've done would really lend well to in media res. Like Save the Cat doesn't really do it. It's probably the next one we talked about, though.
Yeah, when you're looking at in media res, you can kind of... all of the structures that we talked about have kind of assumed that you are going to start off in Act 1. I think our upcoming episode about story shapes is probably the one that is most easily used for an in media res opening. But the other thing that you can do if you're not opposed to flashbacks is that you have the opening be your inciting incident. So about one day in the story spine, and then you work backwards. Some stories will do that where the first chapter or prologue will be the inciting incident, and then you do a time jump back, and then you work your way forward. That's one way that you can jury rig some of these structural tools to be able to get yourself an in media res. But I think the story shapes will be something that will be really useful for thinking about how to go about in media res effectively.
Yes. I realized I never defined in media res. I'm going to do it real quick. So in media res basically means starting in the middle. I don't know exactly what the Latin translates to, but it's roughly to in the middle.
In the middle
so when you start in the middle of the action, this is the equivalent of a movie where it's like, yep, or there's action scene, then a record scratch, and it goes, yep, that's me. And you're probably wondering how I got myself into this situation. So that's what you're looking at for in media res. Pros and cons of the story spine. The pros, it's super easy and it's easy to find examples. For example, like look at any Pixar movie. Like this is called the Pixar Story Spine because Pixar uses it. Additionally, cause and effect are like the real shining stars in the story spine.
Yeah, that makes it really great for keeping an eye on the logic and keeping an eye on the ball of what's moving. The con is that this is more for screenwriting than for noveling, so this lends itself a little bit more easily to shorter experiences. Because think about it this way: when you sit down to watch a movie, you are expecting the movie to be 2 hours long, plus or minus half an hour, right? Depending on if you're watching a children's movie or if you're deciding to watch like an epic that goes on for 3 hours. When you're sitting down with a book, most books in like fantasy, science fiction, romance, you're looking at somewhere in between like 5 to 10 hours, depending on what you're looking at. So the amount of time commitment that you're giving to a book is a lot higher than the amount of time that you're giving to a movie. So some of the structure doesn't translate perfectly, but you can still use it as a really great tool for plotting out a novella if you're writing a novella. Short stories, this is another great tool for you to use for structuring a short story. And then with a little bit of tweaking, maybe adding a few becauses, it can still work great for a novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you have something new to talk about, I'm going to recap what we... Great. So today we talked about the Pixar Story Spine, which is once upon a time, until every day, but then one day, because of this thing that happened that one day, because of that, until finally, and ever since then. And I eliminated all the blanks because it's disorienting to say blank over and over and over again. Is a plot structure tied together by consequences and cause and effect. and it's very similar to the 3-act structure. We're spending a lot of time in Act 1. This has been Quid Pros Quo. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week for Harmon's Story Cycle.
Quid Pros Quo is hosted by DC Winters and ZK Jensen. If you like this episode, be sure to leave us a rating. And if you'd like to contact us, you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. For more episodes, check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts.